When you hear the word Mexico, what comes to mind? Beaches, tacos, or maybe danger? Because that's the story a lot of Americans grow up with, that Mexico is a place ruled by cartels and chaos. But I wanted to find out for myself, is Mexico really as dangerous as people say? Despite having traveled all over Asia and the Middle East, Americans have warned me about safety in Mexico more than almost any other country I've been to, which always seems crazy to me because it's one of our closest neighbors and over 30 million US citizens visit Mexico every year. Since so many people asked me if it was safe, I decided to make this video about my experience solo traveling in Mexico for 1 month. Personally, I think almost everywhere in the world is safer than people think, mostly because of how negative the news tends to be. Sure, there are places I'd avoid, war zones or unstable regions, but for the most part, there are millions of people living their full, normal lives in every country. If they feel safe, why should it be any different for me? I started my trip in San Cristobal de las Casas, a colonial mountain town in Chiapas. While I was there, I met up with my friends Rachel and Rebecca, who both live in Mexico, and we explored the region together, including a trip through Sumidero Canyon, one of the most dramatic places I've ever seen. We took boats down the river surrounded by cliffs towering hundreds of meters above us, with crocodiles sunbathing on the banks. I was honestly a little bit skeptical of coming to Sumidero Canyon because it felt like a tourist trap, but it ended up being one of the most beautiful places I've ever laid my eyes on. Most people I met in Chiapas were kind, curious, and proud of their home. It's a little off the main tourist trail, but I never once felt unsafe there. In fact, the only time I was warned about safety in all of Mexico was when I tried to travel from San Cristobal to Guatemala. As usual, I wanted to try to take local buses, but after 4 different people told me the border could be sketchy, I gave in and booked a shared private shuttle instead. After a week in Guatemala, I flew back to Mexico City, one of the biggest cities in the world. Mexico City has an incredible energy. It's known as one of the most fun cities for young people anywhere. There are tons of things to do, amazing food, art museums on every block, and affordable public transportation. That's a big reason why the number of Americans moving to Mexico has skyrocketed by more than 70% just between 2019 and 2022. I intentionally planned this part of my trip around Mexican Independence Day, which was September 16th. I was honestly a little worried about this because I knew it would be insanely crowded and I had heard how hard Mexicans like to party. But what struck me the most wasn't fear or danger, it was how alive the city felt. The street vendors, the colors, the fireworks, the street performers, and people walking in every direction gave this city a unique feel that I absolutely love. This also brings me to a graphic that I saw recently comparing the murder rate in Mexico City to dozens of cities in the US, and the data may surprise you. And something most people don't realize, the violent crime rate in the US is actually more than double Mexico's. After Mexico City, my final stop was Guadalajara and the nearby town of Ajijic. Guadalajara is the capital of the state of Jalisco, which is actually known for being the state with the highest number of missing people, with nearly 1,000 missing people every year. However, I felt very safe there. I walked around the main square, went to a bakery, visited a local Catholic church, and had some of the best food of my life at Carne Garibaldi, and never once even felt nervous that anything was going to happen to me. An hour or 2 south of Guadalajara lies Ajijic, which was extremely peaceful, a lakeside town where locals and many expats live side by side, full of street art and small town vibes. It reminded me that while the headlines focus on the bad, most of Mexico is just regular people living their normal lives. A big part of the fear around Mexico comes from the word cartel. I'm definitely not an expert, but this is what I've learned after spending a month in Mexico and talking to both locals and foreigners living there. I met one girl from New York who's been living in Mexico for 5 years. She told me that in many areas, cartels do have a big influence. Sometimes they even fill gaps the government leaves behind. Everybody pays some kind of fee or tax to the cartels, and in return, those groups often keep order. I can't say how true that is everywhere, and I don't want to invalidate anyone else's experiences, because I've also heard a lot of horror stories from other people. And like I said, Jalisco, where Guadalajara is known for having people disappeared by cartels frequently. But it does reflect something that a lot of locals acknowledge. The system here isn't always black and white. The image most Americans have of Mexico, constant danger, kidnappings, chaos, just isn't what most travelers experience. Most of the violence you hear about is isolated and targeted, not random. The average day in Mexico looks like people praying at church, little kids playing with pigeons in the town square, young men dancing marimba with their grandmas in the park, and vendors setting up their stands on the same corner every day. It is not a war zone. Like I've said, it is a country full of people living their normal lives. So, after a month of taking public buses, eating street tacos, and practicing my Spanish with locals, I realized that Mexico definitely isn't as dangerous as you'd think from watching the news. But it's not perfect either. Of course, like any other big cities, there are sketchier parts. You probably shouldn't walk down a dark alley at 2 a.m., but you wouldn't do that in LA or Chicago either. If you travel smart, stay aware, and trust locals more than headlines, you probably won't have any problems. Travel is so beautiful for so many reasons, but one of the biggest ones is dispelling myths that promote ignorance and racism, and realizing that humans are the same everywhere. We all want peace and love and happiness and stability in our lives. Thank you for watching. If this helped you see Mexico a little differently, hit like and subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.